A strong personal statement is probably the most tricky and difficult part of the application process. It is completely different than any other kind of writing that people tend to do. And it's the part of the application for MBA programs that people trip up the most. For your GMAT, this is something you can study for and prepare for. You have lots of opportunities to refine those skills. Things like the letters of recommendation, those that should be an accumulation of your experiences and successes. But the personal statement is this really weird thing where people are asking you to do something that you don't normally do in your everyday life, which is to write about yourself, tell a compelling story about yourself, and maybe add just a little bit of maybe bragging is the wrong word, but confident assertiveness about how you talk about yourself. So today what we're going to talk about is how to think about your personal statement and some initial things that you can do to set yourself up for success for a really fantastic personal statement. I'm Brian Phoebe. I am the founder of GuruFi. And what we do is we help people like you who need assistance with their personal statements, whether or not you have a draft or you're just starting the process and you need help with planning. We do that. We also try to provide a lot of free resources like this through GMAT Club and also our website for people who want to go at this on their own. So, like I said, it's right about now in, well, it's about to be August in a couple of days. This is probably the time when most people who are doing the round one applications are really starting to get serious about their personal statements. And actually, before I go any further, I just want to say, if at any point along the way you have a question, please drop into the comments and leave it there. I'll be watching the comments section and I'll provide answers as we go along. There'll also be a little bit of time at the end for people who have questions. I'll be happy to answer them. So like I said, August is the time of the year when most R1 applicants begin really focusing on the personal statement in terms of getting it really refined. The GMAT is obviously something that people take a lot more time with in terms of, some people will plan a year and a half out, taking all the classes and the prep that they need for that. The letters of recommendation, other parts of the application, you're also working on those, but I've found that typically August is when people start this process of really hammering out their personal statement and at least laying down some ideas for their application. As I noted, it's probably the most uncomfortable part of the process because it's so different. I also help people who are applying to graduate schools, and so I will help people who are, like applying to PhD in English literature at Stanford. And you'll say, well, why does someone who can, write beautifully about Shakespeare, why do they need help with a personal statement? Well, because a personal statement is a different kind of writing. You have to be able to write about yourself in a way that is both confident and self-reflective, but also displays a certain degree of humility. And striking this balance between aspirational and descriptive can be really tricky for people. And there are a lot of common mistakes that people make that prevent them from writing a personal statement that is really powerful. And in fact, I've been doing this since 2009. And one of the things I consistently find is that when people will come to me with drafts that aren't really very strong, and I'll have a conversation with them and I'll find out all the things that they're leaving out and the choices that they've made have led them to produce a personal statement that isn't as strong as their background and their aspirations and dreams should have made it. And so I've been able to identify some core mistakes that people make, and I'm going to talk about some of those with you today so that you can avoid those in your own personal statement writing process. I like to think of this as getting from the CV to a personal statement. And the reason that I use that framework is that so often people assume wrongly that a personal statement is just like a narrative version of your CV. That, if a CV describes, your 5 most recent jobs and your full education, then really all your personal statement is figuring out a way to turn those bullet points into proper paragraphs, and that's it. Couldn't be farther from the truth. They are fundamentally different things. Obviously, the CV is kind of like a foundational document, or it's a collection of your experiences, many of which will make it into your personal statement. but you should look to move past writing a narrative CV and instead write a personal statement, which is fundamentally different in terms of its attitude and approach. And to that end, um, I want to talk about having the right mindset, the one big question you should ask, and having a concrete plan of attack for the first part of the essay writing process. In the next couple of weeks, I'll have some additional videos that I'll be posting on GMAT Club's blog, where I'll basically provide something like a full in-depth class for how you go about building your personal statement in detail. But I think that most of the mistakes that people make are actually in the planning phase and the conceptualization phase. And if you get that right, the actual essay can feel much easier to write. So we're going to talk about that right off the start. All right. So what is the right mindset to use? And if there's a single idea that I want you to take away from this presentation, it's that a personal statement needs to be about the future. You need to have a clear, specific, compelling, and feasible plan for your future. It needs to align with the school's strengths and resources, and it should inform the schools that you should select. Now, when I say that a personal statement is about the future, a lot of times people feel like that has to obviously be wrong. I'm writing about my past, right? So shouldn't the personal statement be about all the things that I've done? Well, obviously, your past does matter. It matters a lot. And I'm not telling you to not mention your past. That would be kind of a weird personal statement. Instead, what I'm talking about is conceptualizing the personal statement, keeping your future as the center of what it is that you're thinking about and that you're looking to do. So, for instance, if you want to one day found an NGO that cooperates with local businesses to provide people in Sudan with potable water, right? That's the future that you imagine. Then the things that you emphasize about your past should be things that inform and explain this eventual goal. The goal that you state is kind of the most compelling and interesting thing a lot of times for admissions committee readers, right? That's the thing that you're selling. Like, I need to get an MBA so that I can achieve this thing. But if you don't explain the genesis of that dream, if you don't explain either the things that you have done that have prepared you to accomplish that one day, or, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, even some of the missteps along the way that have demonstrated the areas of weakness or areas that you need to address, if you don't have that in there, then this goal will seem much more like a really abstract dream that you haven't really approached and thought about in a really mature and comprehensive and nuanced way. Kind of the visual that I will often give to clients is that you should imagine that your personal statement has what I call linear coherence. That is, if you imagine your past, your present, and your future. Let me get the line right. Your past, present, and future. You should imagine those are like three dots that all form a line. They all are moving towards a trajectory that makes sense. And so if you pull things from your past that don't really do a good job of explaining where you are now or the future that you hope to have, that can feel like an incoherent application. So when I say that your personal statement is about the future, what that means is you should view it almost like your North Star. It's the thing that you're heading towards. And so all the actions and choices that you make within the essay, the stories that you select, how you explain your interest in the school, how you frame your successes and setbacks, that all has to do with making the case towards showing the reader that you are moving towards this goal in a really thoughtful way, and that the business school that you're applying to plays a really integral and thoughtful, coherent part in this process. So the takeaway from this first idea of thinking about a personal statement as being about the future is, first, you should always begin this process by asking, what do I want to do and become? All right. If you don't know what you want to become and what you want to do, it's almost impossible to write a personal statement, because then all you really have to lean on is a narrative version of your CV. And that is not a compelling or interesting personal statement. So the first question, and in fact, I will often tell people, like, literally just get yourself a note card. And at the very top, when you start the planning process for your personal statement, Just write, I want to become dot, dot, dot. I want to do dot, dot, dot. All right. Write that out, right? Just for yourself, because the process of specifically identifying that and using that as again, the North Star that you're moving toward will make so many of the decisions that you make for your personal statement much easier. Second, specifically ask yourself, what specifically do I need to learn to make that happen? Because this informs, obviously, how you talk about the program that you're applying to. So if you say that I need to learn XYZ and Stanford Business School has a strength in that area, and that makes sense within your journey, then the reader will say, okay, this sounds like the type of person who would really benefit from coming to Stanford Graduate School of Business, right? So that, again, this is one of those things that I would urge you to specifically write down on a note card where you say, what specifically do I need to learn to make my dream or my aspiration happen? So you have these very concrete things about what your next steps are, so that that will help to inform how you talk about that within your essay. And lastly, what is the foundation that has prepared me to pursue this knowledge? So again, you're now reaching back into your past where you're identifying moments where you say, okay, I want to found an NGO, or I want to do a particular type of entrepreneurship, or I want to work in fintech or something like that. You need to be able to pull from your past and find ways to explain how your most important accomplishments and moments have prepared you to achieve that goal. All right. So again, when I say it's about the future, I'm not telling you to ignore your past. Your past is obviously going to be the central pillars of your personal statement. But again, it's always with the mindset of, how does this explain the future that I want to build for myself? All right. So what is the one big question that you should ask yourself before you start writing your personal statement? And that is, what stories do I need to tell? Storytelling is the most important element in writing a powerful personal statement. Personal statements that are memorable are not about, including huge numbers. Like, I managed an account that was, XYZ $1 million. If that's all you say about it, then the reader will forget you in a couple of hours. It's not compelling. You need to find a way to make storytelling a key part of what you do. All right. So as you move from the idea of your CV to the personal statement, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Don't try to provide comprehensive breadth. If your personal statement has 7 stories, those are 7 poorly told stories. Those are much more like sketches or bullet points. So just accept right off the bat, right? This is one of the hardest things I have to do with clients when they want to tell 9 stories in a 600-word personal statement. It's like, you can't do it. There simply is not enough space to do that. So accept right off the bat that you can't provide expansive, huge breadth. But what you can do is be thoughtful about choosing a few stories that tell particular aspects of your aspiration, of your background, of your inspiration for wanting to pursue this path really well. One really well told story is better than 5 or 6 poorly told ones. And in fact, some of my most successful clients have often really only featured 1, sometimes 2 stories in their personal statements. But they tell those stories really well with an eye towards the future, and everything kind of coheres in a way that's really powerful. People connect with stories. There's a lot of fantastic neuroscience that's out there that about how the brain incorporates knowledge from stories. So if you want to be memorable, be a great storyteller. That is far more impactful than, a list of impressive institutions or big numbers on accounts or whatever. If you can tell a story, the reader, as they're reading your personal statement, will feel like they know you and or like they want to know you. And that's the best feeling that you want to have when you're writing a personal statement, the sense of connection with the reader. Because when they sit in committee, they'll say, oh, yeah, Jane, who wrote the story about, founding the startup in St. Louis that did XYZ, and she told this really fantastic story. They'll remember you. And so you'll have advocates within those rooms because they have a sense of who you are and what you would bring to the school. And the last point on this is why storytelling is really important, is it's always hard to convey authenticity and personality And the single best way to do each of those things is through telling a story. If you say, for example, that you want to found an NGO that helps, let's say, Haitian refugees from Miami. Well, if you have a story where you tell about why that is an important thing in your life, then that will feel authentic. Right? Say, oh, John says that he, had this experience where he worked in a particular sector, and that inspired him to do something. Right? If you tell that story, then that makes sense. But if your aspiration just comes out of nowhere, that's in a way that's not supported by a story, it will feel like you're maybe just telling the reader something that they want to hear, or something that you feel like will just be impressive. And so it's really hard to convey authenticity if you don't have a story. Similarly, the best way to convey your personality is to give people a sense of what you have done already. And so if you have a story that shows you doing things, that's the best way that you can give the reader to understand your personality, your values, and how you operate within the world, which are all things that admissions committees want to know. So to select great stories, ask yourself 3 questions. 1, what traits am I trying to convey? 2, how can I demonstrate that I'm ready to pursue my given goals? And 3, what stories convey those traits and demonstrate your preparedness? And again, I'm a big note card guy. There's different ways to do it. As part of a brainstorming process, I would actually just get a note card and go through each of these questions. So you say, okay, what traits am I trying to convey? I'm trying to convey leadership. Okay. So you say, okay, what stories can I use to demonstrate that I have shown leadership? Do this in a really concrete way so that you can start to build out the catalog of stories that you can choose from. You're not going to use all of them. Brainstorming, if it's 20% of what you produce in a brainstorming session ends up in your essay, that's 10 minutes well spent. But use these 3 stories to start to figure out use these 3 questions to figure out the stories that you want to select and prioritize in your personal statement. Now, everyone has heard the old saying, show, don't tell. I've always thought that this is one of the best and worst pieces of advice. It's one of the best pieces of advice because it is absolutely true. It's one of the worst pieces of advice because it doesn't seem to provide specific, actionable information. So when someone says show, don't tell, a lot of times how that feels to you when you receive it is just write better. And what do you do with that? Well, here's what this means. What it really means, show, don't tell, is give me stories. All right. So if you tell someone I have great entrepreneurial instincts, that doesn't really move the needle because it's just a boast without support. But if you show them by saying, when Jane and I built Zenitech, we identified an unserviced niche in the market and created a plan to service it. All right. If you provide a showing sentence like this, you don't have to provide the telling sentence, right? That is there. The reader will understand that you have entrepreneurial instincts. You don't need to add that on top. You have to say it, right? If you have to say, I have great entrepreneurial instincts, then you're failing, right? A good exercise to use when you start planning your personal statements to make a list of 3 to 5 traits. We just talked about that. You hope to convey about yourself. For each one, list instances that show that true by a story. Okay. All right. So how do you build a great story? How do you write a great story? And I always say that the trick here is you got to have the steak and the sizzle. So what does this mean in kind of concrete terms? The steak is all of the kind of must-haves. It's the substantial part of the essay. All right. You have to have a clear why. Why do you want to pursue an MBA? And why do you want to do it right now? You have to have a concrete questions, if you've gone through the process of asking and answering, will be really helpful. And you need to provide evidence of ability or potential. These are the experiences that you're pulling from the past in order to demonstrate that your future is feasible. And if you have these things, it's almost impossible to brag. All right. I know this is a concern that a lot of people have sometimes. Like, well, if I'm just listing, all the great things I do, am I bragging? No. If it's placed within the context of things that you have done and things that you aspire to do, it will not come across as bragging. It will come across as a person with a clear plan who is moving towards a specified goal. And conversely, if that's the sizzle or that's the steak, the substantive stuff, it's like excited should appear in your essay at different points. And you should come across as someone who is confident, right? And is excited and hopeful about the future. Every essay should ultimately have kind of an optimistic and passionate tone, right? You don't want to be a downer. And if you think about it in terms of ways that you can demonstrate connection or human moments with people, think about leadership, learning, and loss. Those are kind of the 3 L's to think about. It's like, how can I demonstrate leadership? What are the instances in the past where I've shown leadership? Where are moments that I've learned something, right? Learning and loss are 2 things that are often connected in these personal statements. Like, because oftentimes you only learn when you fail to achieve something. And so, I made a whole video before for GMAT Club about how to think about your biggest failures or failures along the way. Failures can be great sources of stories to write about for personal statements if they are done within the context of, I tried to do something that didn't work out. I thought deeply about why it didn't work out. I think I have identified why and I've changed in these particular ways, or I need to get this additional training and you can help me with that. But look to have some combination of these 3 things, leadership, learning, and loss, within your essay so that it can convey a sense of passion and excitement and humanity that you want. Because again, this should not just be a narrative version of your CV. It should be a substantive and kind of optimistic explanation of what your aspiration is. Now, when an essay has all steak and no sizzle, if you focus too much on the basic beats of your biography, again, you don't want to just have a narrative version of your CV. And if you don't have insights into what you thought or felt at particular moments of challenge, or, and this is a big one, by the way, if you don't show yourself interacting or collaborating with others. I did a podcast with the director of admissions at Duke, Fuqua, and one of the things he noted is that kind of on an informal level, when they assess personal statements, they look for what the ratio between first person pronouns, I, me, my, whatever, versus collaborative ones like we did this, us, because that will show how much is someone just viewing themselves as a purely isolated individual that takes action versus someone who looks to include people, work collaboratively to cooperate and to lead. And so do think about how much your essay shows you interacting and collaborating with others. Kind of an easy trick is if your essay has no other main characters other than you, then you might want to rethink how you have constructed this. There should be other named people in your essay if you're going to tell a story that shows you collaborating, interacting, and leading other people. Too much emphasis on minutia of details. A lot of times people will send me personal statements where they'll talk, in detail about like I was working for Samsung on this project that had these, that was within this section of the company and our budget was XYZ. And a lot of times those details are not interesting to outside readers and they can be stripped out. And doing that helps you to really distill down to the core lesson that you want that story to convey. Lastly, lists of accomplishments and awards. That's CV stuff. And so don't overburden your essay with I won, best boy in high school, I won valedictorian, all that stuff, unless you have a very specific narrative reason for doing so. And essays that are all sizzle but no steak is when people feel like, oh, I've got to include some emotional stories to, don't really align. You just chose one. Like, hey, my grandma died, so I'm going to throw that in there. It comes across as manipulative and forced and inauthentic. Also, really beware of overly clever hooks at the start of your essay. This is kind of a thing that people get taught in high school. Probably get over-taught it, that you got to have a hook. You want to have a strong opening, but if ever you're way over the top, pull it back. you can give your reader a little bit of credit by allowing them to ease their way into the essay, and having kind of a more straightforward conversational opening 9 times out of 10 is better than a hook. Hook is a word that you should probably try to throw out of your mind as you're building your personal statement. Um, Also, too many adjectives and adverbs. Again, keep your text clean, simple. Not everything has to have a descriptor. You want the descriptors that you use to have an impact, and so use them judiciously and kind of rarely. And lastly, a really good test of whether or not you've nailed the tone is take your personal statement and read it to somebody you trust, to give you frank advice. And the first question you should ask them is, does this sound like I talk? Okay. Now, obviously, it's going to be slightly more formal and structured than a normal conversation. But if it sounds completely different than you, then you might have missed the mark a little bit. All right. So I said I'd give you a concrete plan of attack, and there have been some actionable things that you can do in terms of using your notebook to write out your goals, writing out moments from your past that align with the particular aspiration that you have. But here's kind of a simple exercise that you can do that will not take you very long, that will provide you with a really strong foundation for starting your essay. Get a notebook, write down what you would aspire to do and become. Right? So concretely, I want to do X. Then write down 3 skills or traits that you hope to acquire or build upon that will allow you to achieve that goal. So if you want to open an AI company, what do you need to know in order to be able to do that? Write those things down. Identify a story where you either demonstrated each trait or failed to, right? Or have experience within a related area. And identify a story where you demonstrated the kind of excellence that suggests you can succeed in achieving your goals. And what I would do for this is just set aside 5 minutes for each of them. If you do this and you write 10 things, it will take you less than an hour, but you will be so well positioned to write a really fantastic personal statement. Close yourself off from the world, turn your phone off, and just write in your notebook for 5 minutes on each of these questions. All right. At the end of it, you will have so much good stuff that you can transition over to your personal statement that you'll be in a really great position. I know that people a lot of times feel like the brainstorming part of it can feel, maybe a little bit hippie or whatever, is like little too touchy-feely. Trust me, what you want to do is just get ideas flowing. And brainstorming, a really great thing about it is it's low pressure because nobody's going to see your brainstorming. This should just be for you. And a lot of times where writer's block comes in is where you feel like, I've got to write something awesome because the admissions committee is going to see this. This first hour that you use, this brainstorming, nobody's going to see it but you. So you can just write freely in your own voice. I would encourage you to do it with a pen and pad and not typing. There's a lot of great research that talks about how the process of writing with your hand on a pen actually triggers creativity in a much better way. So Kai Poi says, do you have proportion on how I introduce myself until what my future will be? So let me give you the most frustrating answer. The real answer is that it sort of depends. And what it depends on is kind of what story you want to open with, and how you want to set it up. Typically, what happens is usually about the first quarter of your essay will a lot of times be introductory stuff. And at the very end of that opening quarter, or like the first paragraph or something, you'll make a clear indication of how that initial event inspired you to move in a particular direction, and you'll then state what your future goal is. A lot of times people will have the goal further down in the essay. You can do that. You just want to make sure that you're maintaining contact with the reader and they're still interested. You don't want to have a huge wind up. Sometimes people will begin their essay, in childhood, and then they'll talk about grade school and junior high and high school. And the introduction is just too much. Okay. So do make sure that whatever that initial framing, that initial introduction is, it's pretty lean and direct and it flows. I would say most people will introduce their aspiration either at the start of their second paragraph or the end of their first, but it's not like a hard rule. Some people will do it later on, particularly if they feel like that initial setup story. So for example, if they founded a business and it didn't quite go well, and so they then learned that they needed to do X, Y, and Z. If it needs additional explanation, then you can have it further down in the essay. There's not like a hard, it must be done this way. Thank you for the question. All right. Final hints. Before you start outlining, have a clear sense of what you hope to emphasize. So again, keep in mind, what are the traits that I want to demonstrate? What is the goal that I have for my life post MBA? And distill your core positioning down to 2 or 3 sentences. That is, the old elevator pitch things. Like if you had 30 seconds to convince me to let you into Wharton or whatever, what would you tell me if I gave you 3 sentences to do it? All right. So have that in your mind, is that will be, excuse me, that will help you to identify the direction you need to go. And again, brainstorming and free writing, I think, are fantastic ways to get at this. Because remember, your core task is storytelling. All right. So Fee asked another question. How do I tackle gaps in my CV and my personal statement? Gaps caused by unemployment, mental health, loss, etc. All right. So this is a really common one. And the first thing I would tell you is that the idea of a traditional candidate doesn't really exist in the same way that it used to. And so there's less of a sense of, if there's a gap, it must be some catastrophic failure on your part. People don't quite feel that way in the way that maybe 15 years ago that was the case. Like a gap in your CV was like this, it was a scarlet letter. So begin with that. Lots of people have gaps in their CVs. The way to explain anything that's a problem, and again, you can go back to GMAT Club if you can. There's a video that I did for GMAT Club where I talk for about 45 minutes about how you handle difficult things, including gaps like this. And so you can see a fuller version of that in the GMAT Club YouTube. But I'll kind of explain the quick beats of it. The first thing is you want to be direct and honest about it. So if you, let's go through common types, right? So you listed a couple, but there's for example, if you had a gap in your education because you failed out, right? A lot of people get kicked out of school. Obviously, you'd prefer not to, but the fact is that a lot of times people, when they're 19 years old, are not mature and prepared for college, and they don't do well. They come back with a better sense of who they are and more maturity, and they kill it. They feel like they need to explain, and they do need to explain why the first year and a half they had a 2.1 GPA or a 1.5 or 0.7, whatever. I've seen some pretty bad GPAs get in some pretty good schools. You explain it. You say, look, when I was 19, I did not have maturity. I was out of the house for the first time. I failed in these really substantial ways. You admit it, you're direct, you're clear about it, and you say, okay. But by the time I was 25, I realized that if I wanted to achieve things in life, I had to get a college diploma. I went back, a more mature person, a more focused person. I got a 4.0 since I came back. This is the person who I am, and not that 19-year-old. And so, as you assess my application, keep that in mind, right? It's a tight 4 or 5 sentence little block where you address it, accept responsibility, and move on. All right. So the same thing if you got fired, right? So people get fired in different ways. Sometimes a company just shrinks, right? The economy got bad, or a particular company just got rid of you. Sometimes it's because you made a mistake. And again, you want to tell the story directly. You want to say, look, here's what happened. Here's what I did. Here's what I did in response in order to prepare myself for the next thing and to recognize any errors that I might have made. And then you move forward. The same thing with something with respect to mental health. There's a lot more awareness about mental health and a lot more compassion and empathy for people who are going through mental health crises. But a very common thing that I have dealt with clients who have had to take mental health breaks is that frequently these things are undiagnosed. And so they'll struggle with something. They might fail out of school. They might get fired from a job. And this is the thing that forces them to then get the medical attention they need. They can then say, look, it's been whatever, X months, 18 months, 2 years, whatever, since this happened. Since then, I have reprioritized my mental and physical health. I'm in a much better place. I have gone back to work and I've received excellent reviews, right? So the best case is always when you can show that since the failure happened, you've had successes that demonstrate that you've made the changes that you need to make. All right. Hope that answers your question. But again, if you want more on this, go to GMAT Club's YouTube page, and you will find, if you do a search for me, GuruFi, one of the presentations that I did was a whole long thing about how you handle difficulties and setbacks, and there's a lot of detail about how to think about it. Kai asks, thanks. Some universities requested cover letter and personal statement. Do you know how to deliver both? Must be linked. So the second part of the question is, I'm sorry, I keep giving you, it depends. Different schools have different ways of submitting applications. And so most of the time it's simply like an uploading function. So whether or not they're connected, that usually there's like a departmental secretary who will format every person's or ensure that everyone's applications are formatted the same so that they're delivered to people in ways that are easy for them to read. Some schools will, it's more rare in MBA, but a lot of schools will request two different documents, like a personal statement and something like a statement of purpose. In those instances, you do want to make sure that you don't have a ton of overlap. You should view them as two distinct opportunities to talk about yourself. A cover letter should be much more lean. It should not be a 700-word document. They tend to be in, maybe the 300-word range or something like that. Much more succinct, right? It is a truncated, direct, and clear assessment of what this is. Like, this is my application. Here's my CV. I'm applying to this school so I can accomplish X, Y, and Z. It's usually, like I said, a much more direct and short version than a personal statement. And so if you deliver them, use most interfaces that I've seen, each document is sort of delivered separately. There are some times where they'll ask you to put them all into one and upload them singularly. But that's how is it. Hopefully I'm answering your question, Kai. Yeah, and the main thing is that if ever schools request two different types of documents, then I would read the instructions very carefully and also recognize that you don't do yourself any favors by repeating a ton of stuff from one to the other. You should view them as distinct opportunities to talk about different aspects of your life, career, and education. All right. Happy to take some more questions, and so I'll wait just a second. But I want to thank everyone who showed up. Again, I'm Brian at GuruFi. We've helped over 10,000 applicants get into their dream schools. And we focus exclusively on the written portions of your application. So that's your personal statement, your CV, letters of recommendation. So check us out at gurufi.com. And again, if you do have additional questions about how to talk about difficult moments in your life or career, I would urge you to go check out the GMAT Club YouTube channel, as we have some stuff on there. And there's a ton of other people who've also put out great materials there. And the GMAT Club blogs and forums are also a great thing. And so finally, in about a week and a half, I'll start uploading. We recorded a 10-part series about how to go about putting together a really tight personal statement, sort of series of short lessons. So in a week and a half, make sure you check out the GuruFi blog for the first of that, so that you can have us sort of virtually guiding you through every step of the process. Once again, thank you for showing up. And I wish all of you guys the best of luck in your MBA applications and your future professional endeavors. I will see you guys later.